Hello, and thank you very much for coming along again this evening. This evening we're going to look at some dramatic images and actions of climate activists elsewhere in the world. Not here yet. I say yet because it is becoming a worldwide movement, and one that's catching ground not so much among adults or even college kids yet, but it's much younger. It has to do with the group of students that are outraged at a very early age because nothing is happening internationally. Nothing is happening. So we're beginning to look at this whole question of, can the grown-ups catch on and catch up with the youth? It's not clear they can. The youth, in effect, are moving much faster and with much greater impact than the grown-ups. This has been true for quite a while. In fact, in 1992, at the UNCED meetings, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, a 12-year-old girl named Severn Suzuki stood up and gave a very moving speech. Take a look.
Hello, I'm Severn Suzuki, speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. But I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct, and you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. Do not forget why you are attending these conferences, who you're doing this for. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world, and we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.
Well, you can't get a more powerful statement from a 12-year-old in 1992. Even the professionals who were most engaged in the climate crisis, the environmental crisis in general, were not capable of that kind of direct statement at the first global summit on the environment. 1992, the UNCED meetings in Rio de Janeiro, first summit, that is, heads of state coming to listen to this. Now, George H.W. Bush went to that summit, came back, and had both houses of Congress pass legislation to support the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It passed easily, and nothing has been done to implement it since. In fact, members of his own party, the Republican Party, have become the most dramatic opponents of doing anything effective about it. Now, this hasn't stopped the youth from speaking out. In fact, most recently, the Conference of Parties meeting, the number 23 that took place, was to have taken place in Fiji, was hosted in Bonn because of the logistics of trying to hold it in Fiji were too difficult to surmount. This had become such a global issue that the Germans, in effect, said, let's hold it in Berlin. But there, too, the children showed up and made very forceful statements.
Adults claim that they're doing something about climate, but look at what a mess they leave for young people. They are not slowing down the climate freight train by 1 iota, not by 1 bit. 25 years after the first Rio Earth Summit, the words that 12-year-old Severin Suzuki spoke should still ring in the ears of government officials. But do our governments really hear about her concerns? Or do they care more about deals with the fossil fuel industry? Fears expressed by this young girl are coming true. Species are disappearing. Coral reefs are bleaching. Their life is disappearing. Droughts become stronger and fires are raging, driving refugees and increasing conflict among people. Storms become stronger and floods more devastating. Ice sheets are melting. We debate whether we will lose coastal cities in 150 years, 100 years, or 50 years. And adults wonder why young people have increased anxiety today. Severin spoke directly to the delegates at Rio. A few of them sat up and took notice, but how long did it affect their conscience? More important, did it affect their government's actions? No. If I spoke before the delegates today, I would feel the same fear and anger that she expressed, and more, because I see the hypocrisy of our governments, of our leaders. In truth, for all their posturing, they have accomplished painfully little to avert the onset of catastrophic climate change.
That's an understatement. Accomplished painfully little. They've actually opposed accomplishing anything. At that conference that took place, the Conference of Parties that took place just recently in December, the Trump administration showed up with a delegation that was trying to promote coal, the increased use of fossil fuels. It would have been a joke if it weren't so tragic. It was laughed off the stage, but they went ahead anyway, as if they were in charge of what? They're not even in charge of their own faculties, let alone an ecosystem.
Money has been shown to be more important than their children's future. I am afraid and I am angry at the problems that greedy and foolish adults have created. But just as Severin said, in my anger, I am not blind. And in my fear, I am not afraid to tell them all, diplomats, negotiators, leaders of government, banks, and businesses, how I feel.
Now, it's important to keep this in mind. She's very clear, right? Sophie's very clear about what Severin said 25 years ago, before Sophie was born, right? She has no personal experience of what Sophie said. It's only because it was recorded on tape that she knows about it. And as it turns out, her grandfather has been involved in that struggle ever since that early time. Her grandfather, very famous climate scientist globally, James Hansen. And the two of them together have taken up a very interesting approach, which she then elaborates.
You say you love us, but I challenge you to make your actions reflect your words, without hesitation, without consideration of profit, instead caring about what is most important, the lives of your children. If you continue to pursue selfish aims, the results will be enormous suffering by your children, and no amount of money will save even the wealthiest of children. Because money is, at its root, a fiction, and it will disappear rapidly in the world that you are leading us toward. I hope that you are listening, and I thank you for letting these words into your heart.
She hopes that the delegations are listening, and she hopes that you will let these words into your heart. Now, this is a very interesting appeal. She doesn't leave it there. In fact, she goes the next step. Take a look.
I hope that you are listening, and I thank you for letting these words into your heart. However, I must also say that we young people must not rely on only the hopes that you might be listening. Young people are people, and we have rights, and we must fight for them. Along with 20 other young people and my grandfather, I am a plaintiff in a lawsuit filed by Our Children's Trust against President Trump and the United States government for violating our constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property. We still live in a nation of laws, and I believe that our courts will find in our favor and require a government to develop and carry out a plan to reduce fossil fuel emissions. But will it be too late? And there is such a thing as being too late. I encourage more young people to stand up for their rights. Just a few days ago, this group in Minnesota was granted intervenor status as they fought to stop a new tar sands pipeline. These young people are standing up to fight on their own, without money and without a lawyer. Meanwhile, what are adults doing? Making money. Developing the dirtiest carbon on Earth, tar sands, tar shale, and hydrofracking, leaving a mess for young people to clean up. And they even leave us the tab, $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. Where can we find it? We must fight for our rights now, before it is too late. Thank you for listening and supporting us.
Well, thank you for listening and supporting us. If you looked at the delegations listening to this, there weren't very many. In fact, most of them were press and not government delegations. They were members of the press. And they're bewildered. They're bewildered because they're usually covering heads of state and economists who have a plan here and there. And for a student to get up, make this statement, she's a college student, at that, but she's making a statement as a college student straight over the heads of all intervening institutions, right to the public about the lawsuit she's taking with other teenagers against the United States government for their deprivation of the right to life. Take a look at the questions.
We can open it up to questions now, if there are any questions.
Thank you. Marlo Hood with Agence France Presse. Sophie, a question for you. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your lawsuit, what the basis of it and what the status of it is right now.
Sure. This lawsuit was filed in 2015 against the federal government by an organization called Our Children's Trust, which is based in Oregon. And we have what makes our case different from other environmental lawsuits is our very strong constitutional basis. We talk about the concept of public trust and the public trust doctrine, but we really have a strong tie to our Constitution, saying that we are fighting for our right to life, liberty, and property, Fifth Amendment rights. And so it's very unprecedented, as the judges in Eugene have said so far, and it's looking really great. The process is very slow, but it's the best we can do.
Yeah, we should say the Trump government has tried to slow this suit down by asking the Court of Appeals to intervene. And it is now being delayed because of that. But I think that will not last much more than a few weeks longer. But instead of the trial being in February, it may be delayed a few months because of that.
Any other questions?
Alex Whiting from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Could you tell me what you hope to achieve through the lawsuit?
The main goal is to put pressure on the government, to have them realize that young people notice that they're not doing their jobs, and we're not going to be quiet about it. No civil rights suit, no civil rights issue in history has ever been solved without the pressure of the public behind it. So that's the main goal, is to show the government that that pressure is there, and then once the lawsuit is successful, the goal would be to have the government have to enforce an effective plan to reduce emissions at a safe level, and then the courts would have to, unlike the Kyoto Protocol or RCP.2 or 2.6, the courts would have to check back in with them and make sure that they're committing.
Yeah, the suit asks for the government to have a plan to reduce emissions at a rate that the science has specified, which would, if followed globally, and if you extract CO2 via improved agricultural and forestry practices, to the tune of, at the time we began the first lawsuit, it required 100 gigatons extraction from the air. Well, now, if you want to get back to 350 parts per million by the end of this century, you would actually have to extract 150 instead of 100 gigatons. So it's it's an ambitious target to get back to what is estimated to be a safe level of atmospheric carbon dioxide. It's an ambitious target, but that's what the science tells us, and that's what's been ignored by the governments around the world. They just pretend that, well, if we're doing some things, moving in the right direction, that maybe we'll solve the problem. But as we showed on our first slides, the emissions just keep going up.
That's right. The emissions just keep going up. Listen to the full exchange with these bewildered journalists, and then see what's happened since. Younger students in high school, or our equivalent in Europe, have gone out on strike, largely through the inspiration of this one woman, Greta Thunberg, who has done an amazing series of public statements and physical presence out in front of the Belgian parliament to begin with, and then further afield. She went to the climate conference, the Conference of Parties in Katowice, Poland, in December 2018, and gave this speech. Staggering.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of Climate Justice Now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. You have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
The real power belongs to the people. This was even more forcefully stated a month later in Davos. Take a look.
16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in Davos, Switzerland, where she's calling on heads of state and global elites gathered for the World Economic Forum to take urgent action on climate change. Ahead of her trip to the forum, Thunberg posted a video online accusing corporate and government leaders of essentially doing nothing to prevent a climate catastrophe.
People say that the climate crisis is something that we all have created. But that is just another convenient lie, because if everyone is guilty, then no one is to blame. And someone is to blame. Some people, some companies, and some decision makers in particular has known exactly what priceless values they are sacrificing to continue making unimaginable amounts of money. I want to challenge those companies and those decision makers into real and bold climate action, to set their economic goals aside and to safeguard the future living conditions for humankind. I don't believe for 1 second that you will rise to that challenge, but I want to ask you all the same. I ask you to prove me wrong.
Greta Thunberg made international headlines last year after she launched a one-day-a-week school strike against climate change, held every Friday outside the Swedish parliament. The school strike quickly spread and became a global phenomenon.
And in fact, spread to Belgium.
A record 30,000 school children and students swamped Brussels city centre, braving the rain and snow to demand action on climate change. They're using the only leverage they have, school attendance, to urge leaders to act. It's the third week in a row that students have skipped class to protest, and it's the biggest crowd yet.
This is really incredible. This is really a movement, a generation that is standing up. This cannot be ignored.
Well, should not be ignored, that's for sure. But in fact, in the U.S., we're ignoring them. And the real question comes down to this: can the grown-ups catch up and catch on to what the youth are doing, or should the children simply go back to school? What would they learn there? To learn that it's already too late for them to have a future. There is no future because what the grown-ups have done. The hate, the anxiety, the bitterness that can build up in the next years as they realize that is tremendous. But fortunately, there are other solutions underway.
This is Noam Chomsky. You're watching Cambridge Community TV.